Is it a clicker? Is it click? Great. Merhaba. Really happy to be here with a room of passionate and also driven designers. We're all professionals who have a lot of stuff to do. When you need to get something done, where do you usually go? The founder of Basecamp, Jason Fried, has been asking people this question for many years. The answers he gets range from people go to the cafe, they go to the library, they go to an extra bedroom in a house, or they work early in the mornings or late in the evenings when no one else is around. There's an answer that we're expecting but we are not hearing. That is the office. People don't go to the office to get something done. And what is that? I made this comic to describe a typical day at work, at the office. So you could be solving a complex UX problem with many flows, or you could be synthesizing a lot of complicated user research insights. And when you get into the flow and there's chatter in the background and people are like tapping on your shoulder to tell you some, unimportant things, and then you get interrupted and you lose your focus. So that happens very often when I work in the office. As well, according to research, people are 66% less productive when they work in an open plan office, which is what majority of tech companies offer nowadays. So if working in an office is not productive, what's the other solution? In my opinion, that is remote work. So I've been working remotely for actually 7 years now. And I work remotely as an independent designer, as well as a talent on TopTal. And in my spare time, I volunteer for the nonprofit organization called Ladies at UX. I founded the Amsterdam chapter and am now leading a community of close to 2,000 members. So you might be thinking, okay, I'm a user experience designer, and I spend all my days behind a desk. Well, how do you talk to stakeholders? How do you talk to users? How do you run workshops? Or how do you prove the value of UX? I want to say all of these questions do not apply only to remote work, but you could also ask yourself if that's how you do UX in office, because I know plenty of people who are not actually doing any user research, even if they work in the office. So I'd like to tell you about my flows, my workflows for product design, UX design, as well as user research. So my process is pretty standard. It starts with communicating, gathering requirements, understanding what we're going to do, and then we're going to plan the user story and the scope. And then you get into design and iteration phase, and when the design is done, you sign off the design and hand off to developers. So for the first part, communicate. In a typical workplace, you have a meeting. A bunch of people are going to gather around a room. They're going to discuss what we're going to do, who's going to do what. Now, in a remote context, you can do the same via video conferencing. So I know what you're thinking. Majority of us have probably used a video conferencing tool sometime in their work life. And there are so many problems. Range from like, can you hear me? Oh, your voice is breaking up. There's a lag, and so on. So I have experiencing all of that. So for the last 7 years, here are my main takeaways for how to improve your video conferencing. So as a remote worker, it becomes your responsibility to have good internet and also offer good audio quality to your colleagues. And after trying so many different video conferencing tools, these 3 are my favorite that really guarantee good quality. As well, you can record all of the sessions for later record. So those are Zoom, GoToMeeting, and Appearing. So after you talk about the requirements, who's going to do what, now we're going to plan what we're going to do. And then you have another meeting to talk about what is the scope, what's the deadline, and so on. You sometimes do the same in remote work. You have a meeting, but a lot of remote workers, we work autonomously. That means we often just use a project management tool like Jira or Asana, where you're going to add a task and then plan a deadline. And then you get into design phase. Now, majority of designers, we work also with digital tools, but then when you work remotely, you also get to use these tools, and as well, you get to use collaboration tools, such as real-time board, where you can collaborate with people across the globe at exactly the same time. I use this tool, real-time board, to make customer journey maps, flows, and a lot of other things. And then we also need feedback to improve our designs. Or you can have a meeting to when somebody presents his or her designs, and you can do the same remotely, where you can use apps like Envision, where you can leave feedback asynchronously, or you could use freehand to gather all feedback and draw and annotate on the designs at exactly the same time. And now when a project is done, you're going to deliver it. And what happens? You have another meeting to talk about, is this done yet, and then who's going to build it. For remote workers, again, because we work autonomously, oftentimes we just update the task in a project management tool to done. So that was my user experience design flow, and now let's talk about user research flow. My user research process is also pretty standard. Let's say we communicate a requirement, and now that's clear. It goes to recruiting the users, as well as scheduling the users, actually doing the interviews or the usability test, and then we synthesize the insights, and then we report to stakeholders. So now for the recruit part, let's just say a company is old-fashioned and they do not want to use any online tools or digital tools. Let's say they're old-fashioned. So typically, when you want to find user research participants, you probably want to go on the street, you can set up a booth in a store, or you can call organizations. Let's say you need 100 people to participate in the user research. How long would that take using those methods? For remote user research, I was able to gather more than 100 participants in just one night. So I utilized online networks and also like forums, Craigslist, and Facebook groups when I was looking for participants to participate in like Taiwan and Japan user research. And then when you gather the participants, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to schedule the interviews or usability sessions. Let's say the company is old-fashioned. They don't want to use any digital tools, so what they're going to do? They're going to have piles of notebooks, and they're going to have a lot of stickies on the walls. A remote worker would then use digital tool to organize all of this information. They're going to also be able to collaborate with other researchers, so they all have a clear understanding of who they're going to interview and what is the content of the user research. And then you're going to do the interviews or the usability test. So for the usability test or the interviews, you might invite them to your office or to a lab where you can do the test or the interviews. And now for remote work, we can do the same. It just happens digitally. So there are actually a lot of apps that allow user researchers to conduct all these interviews and usability tests remotely. You can ask the user to walk through your product. You can ask them about their pain points, their habits, and then you can follow up. So in remote user research, it actually does not mean nothing goes wrong. So I have experienced a few hiccups before. There was one time where a user internet is not very good. Actually, when I showed her the Envision prototype, like Chrome was not loading. So the remote user researcher just have to think on her feet, and then we just switch to Safari and it worked, and we carry on the research from there. There was also another instance where a user was reluctant to share his screen with us. So thinking on your feet, I then asked him to switch in an iPad where it's a personal device instead of his work computer. So being a user researcher remotely means that you have to be spontaneous and solve problems just on the spot. And now you have all these interviews and you have the usability test. You're going to synthesize the user research insights. Isn't that the most fun part of user research? And traditionally, people are going to gather around the room again, and they're going to have a wall of stickies and notes, and people are going to look at it, and people are going to discuss. In a remote work way, we do the same, except that you don't even need a physical wall. You have a big online whiteboard where people can collaborate, people can arrange all the stickies in a really easy way. And then you can use tools such as Airtable to document all of these findings, which are searchable and also makes it easy for collaboration. Now you have a great user research, and now you're going to report to the stakeholders. What happens? You're going to have a meeting with the stakeholders, and you're going to walk through the user research. As a remote worker, we also do the same, but instead we have an online meeting where the researcher also walks through the stakeholders with the findings. Did you actually notice how many meetings were in the traditional face-to-face work method? I noticed too. So this is what happened. This is what I learned after 7 years of remote work. This is my day when I actually worked in office. So my day starts at 9, it ends at 5, and then I wake up at 8 a.m. to prepare to work, and I bike to the office because I live in Amsterdam. And I'm going to work for a little until 10:30, where we have the stand-up meeting. And then after the stand-up meeting, I have a bit of time to work again. And then at 12, we are called to the cafeteria for lunchtime because it's a big office and every team has a designated time where they have to go to lunch. Otherwise, the queue at the cafeteria just goes crazy. So at 12, I have to go to get lunch, even if I'm not hungry. So then you go to the cafeteria, you're going to line up to get your lunch. And of course, you want to socialize your colleague and take a bit of time because lunch is enjoyable. And after lunch, it's now 1, and you try to get back to your work again. So you work at 1 o'clock, and until maybe 2 o'clock, your colleague is like, who wants to go to Starbucks? So of course, you don't want to be the loner, so you say, me. So you go to Starbucks with your colleague, and you come back, and you're trying to get into work again. So that time is already 2:30. And you look at your calendar, you realize, oh, I have a meeting at 3 o'clock. And then what do? For 30 minutes, you really cannot do anything productive. So you end up talking with some colleagues, you end up maybe checking some emails, or if you have a beanbag or somewhere to relax, that's probably when you relax. So you go to the meeting at 3, and then you finish at 4, and you realize you have 1 hour left to do your project. So you work at 4 o'clock until 5 when a colleague is like, Jenny, do you want to go to a rooftop for drinks? So you don't want to be the loner, so of course you say, sure. Now compare it with my remote work workflow. My work also starts at 9, ends at 5. And then I wake up at 7:30, which is just slightly earlier than when I used to wake up. I wake up at 7:30 because I want to work on my side project. I use this time to have mentorship calls with people based in Asia. I use this time to write a new talk. I use this time to write an article, that sort of thing. And then at night, I switch to client work. And I work for a bit until 11, where that's usually the stand-up meeting. And after the meeting, I have time to go back to my project again. And then I can take the lunch break whenever I want. So because I work from home, I usually have the time to cook a healthy lunch. And pretty often, I just microwave leftovers. So my lunch break is actually pretty short. And then in the afternoon, I go back into a productive work session again until 3 o'clock, where I usually sync up with colleagues in the US time zone. So therefore, my afternoons are actually pretty good, focused period for me to focus on my project. So at 3, I have this meeting, ends at 4, and at 4 I do more follow-ups, I iterate on my project some more until 5 p.m. So 5 p.m. is when I switch to side project mode again. I have mentorship calls with people based in the US, as well as I could iterate on my article, or I could do some of my volunteer work for ladies at UX. So when you look at just the productive time, in the traditional workplace, you get 5 hours. In a remote work context, you got 6 hours. Not to mention, you got extra 3.5 hours to do all of the side project you want to accelerate your career. So here's what I learned after 7 years of remote working. When remote working, I'm actually even more productive because I measure by the amount of side project or project that I deliver. When I work in a traditional workplace, I have pretty much just one side project because working in the office, when you interact with people all day, it's actually pretty exhausting, at least for me. But then when I do remote work, I can take on so many more side projects. Right now, I'm taking on 2 freelance clients. I am volunteering, I am mentoring, and I'm also speaking and writing. As well as a remote worker, it becomes your responsibility to set boundaries for work hours and distractions. So that is actually one of the biggest challenges as a remote worker, is that it's really hard to switch between different clients, or when do you know when you're off work. So what I do is that I set my Slack status to online or offline, depending on if I'm actually working or not. I also have a pretty rigid do not disturb schedule. So if I'm really off, I am really trying to create a habit where I don't go back to the Slack, or I don't check any of my Jira or whatever again. And for distractions, it really takes self-discipline as well as practice to not surf on YouTube all day, for example. And if you want a handy tool, I use Self-Control. It's a Mac app where it can block every app that you set. You can block YouTube, you can block Facebook, whatever you want. So therefore, hopefully, it really helps you to be more disciplined and focused when you're remote working. And finally, as a remote worker, your life depends on the internet. So thank you. This was my talk on remote work, and this is my contact information if you want to talk shop about remote and reach out with any questions on Twitter or email. Thank you.